Anna has always been a woman of unshakable faith. Since his childhood, he grew up believing that God was present in every aspect of his life. Every difficulty she faced, she attributed to a bigger plan, something that would make sense in the end. However, over the past few years, life seemed to test his faith in cruel and unforgiving ways. Little by little, disappointments and suffering accumulated, and Anna found herself completely helpless. Her prayers, once full of hope, were now just empty whispers, as if God's silence was confirmation that he had abandoned her. The breaking point came with a series of personal tragedies. First, the loss of her job, which left her disoriented and not knowing how to start over. Then, the death of his mother, which was like an irreversible shadow over his life. Anna had faced loss before, but this time it felt different. Like the pain was so deep that it absorbed all the light around her. She began to wonder where God was in all of this. Why didn't he help her? Why did I let the suffering continue, with no end in sight? Day after day, Anna moved further away from what, throughout her life, had been her foundation, her faith. He tried to find solace in churches, but each sermon seemed empty. Each word of comfort sounded like a distant echo, unable to fill the void in his heart. Friends and family tried to cheer her up, saying that time would heal all wounds, but Anna could no longer believe it. She wondered how there could be a purpose in so much pain, and the only conclusion she came to was that perhaps God was no longer there for her. Maybe, in the end, she was alone. As the months went by, Anna isolated herself more and more. The energy you once used to help others and maintain an active life has disappeared. His days were a succession of gray, meaningless hours. The Bible, which had once been his refuge, remained closed on a dusty shelf, untouched. Anna simply didn't see any point in opening those pages anymore. Why read about unfulfilled promises? Where was the loving, protective God she believed she knew? It was on an ordinary morning, when Anna wasn't expecting anything special, that her life began to change. She was walking aimlessly through a park near her home, trying to find some peace in the silence of nature. The sky was cloudy, reflecting his gloomy mood. Without realizing it, Anna ended up sitting on a bench next to a small chapel in the middle of the park. There, an elderly man approached with slow steps and sat down next to her without saying a word. Anna glanced at him, not interested in talking, but the man, with a calm expression, soon broke the silence. "You look tired, my daughter. You carry a heavy burden." Surprised by the stranger's perception, Anna hesitated before answering. I don't know what to do anymore. It feels like God has abandoned me." The man, with a deep and wise look, smiled gently. "Sometimes, when the storm is too strong, we can't see the hand that is outstretched to help us. But it is there. God has not abandoned you, Anna." She looked at him, her heart sinking. How did that man know his name? How could he understand her pain so deeply? Those words, simple and direct, touched something inside her that had long been dormant. There was an inexplicable calm at that moment, and Anna, even without completely understanding, felt a small ray of hope pierce through the darkness in which she was immersed. The elderly man's words continued to echo in Anna's mind as she remained sitting next to him on the park bench. There was something about his serenity that made her want to hear more, despite the resistance she still felt in her heart. For a long time, she had convinced herself that God had abandoned her, but at that moment, a flicker of doubt appeared. What if she was wrong? What if, somehow, he was still there, waiting for her to see him again? The silence between the two lasted for a few minutes, until the elderly man spoke again, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Sometimes when we think we are alone, that's when God is closest to us. He carries us through the most difficult times, even when we can't feel his presence." Anna looked at him, unable to hide the doubt in her eyes. "But I prayed so hard, and nothing happened. If he's really there, why didn't he answer?" The man watched her patiently, as if he understood exactly what she was going through. "God doesn't always respond the way we hope, Anna. The pain, the silence, it could all be part of a bigger plan, even if it's impossible to understand at the moment. He's waiting for you to allow him to return to your heart. Those words hit her deeply. Anna realized that all the time she felt abandoned, perhaps it was she who had closed herself off, who had erected barriers, preventing any form of spiritual healing from entering. "I don't know how to do this," Anna confessed, her voice breaking for the first time in months. She was tired, emotionally exhausted. Carrying the weight of her tragedies and disappointments alone had drained her of all her strength. "I don't know if I still have faith. I don't know if I can believe again." The man tilted his head slightly, his expression compassionate. "Faith is like a seed, Anna. It doesn't have to be big to grow. Just plant it and water it, and it will blossom at the right time. The simple fact that you're here, wondering if you can still believe, is already a sign that the seed of faith is still in you." Anna looked at the ground, feeling tears filling her eyes. For so long, she had believed that her faith was dead, that there was nothing left inside her but bitterness and sadness. But now, faced with those simple words full of truth, she began to wonder if, perhaps, she was wrong. Maybe there was a chance to go back, to start over. But how to do this? How to find God again after feeling lost for so long? "I want to believe," she whispered, almost voiceless, "but I don't know where to start." The elderly man smiled, his gaze full of tenderness and understanding. "Start where you are, Anna. It doesn't have to be perfect. God doesn't expect perfection. Just take a step, open your heart, and he will do the rest." Those simple words planted something new inside her, a small seed of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. The man then got up, ready to leave, but before leaving, he placed his hand on Anna's shoulder affectionately. "You're not alone. You never were. Remember that." And with that, he left, leaving Anna sitting there, reflecting on everything she had just heard. The pain was still there. The wounds hadn't closed, but something inside her had changed. For the first time in months, Anna felt that perhaps her story with God was not yet finished. As she watched the man walk away through the park, Anna realized that although life was still difficult and full of uncertainty, there was something new in her heart. Something that she could barely name, but that somehow made her believe that perhaps the end of her faith was not definitive. Maybe God was still with her, patiently waiting for her to return. In the days following her meeting with the elderly man in the park, Anna couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. His words echoed in his mind constantly. "Faith is like a seed. The simple fact that you are here is a sign that it still exists." Anna had never thought about her faith in this way. For her, faith was something unbreakable, something you either had or lost forever. However, the possibility that there was still a small remnant of faith within her brought a new perspective. It was a small seed, yes, but it was hers, and now, for the first time in a long time, she was beginning to think that maybe she could grow it again. Anna knew that the process of recovering her faith would be slow. She didn't expect to wake up one day and suddenly be at peace with God or the life she was living. The tragedies she experienced, the losses she suffered, were still present, and she knew it would take time to overcome the pain. However, something inside her changed. There was a small opening, a sincere desire to try to start over. Determined to do something different, Anna decided to take the first step. She knew that this step, no matter how small, could mark the beginning of her healing journey. On a quiet morning, after weeks of avoiding any contact with her spirituality, Anna finally opened the Bible that had been forgotten on her shelf. The book looked old, dusty, and his hand hesitated for a moment before opening the pages. For so long, she refused to read those words, feeling like they no longer made sense in her life. Now she felt vulnerable opening that book, as if she were allowing herself to look at a part of herself that she had ignored. The words of the Bible seemed different this time. They didn't bring the immediate answers Anna expected, nor did they comfort her in the way she needed, but at least they didn't seem so distant anymore. Slowly, she allowed herself to read a few verses, without rushing, without pressure. And while reading, something curious happened. Anna felt a small peace. It wasn't complete peace I was looking for, but a light feeling that I was at least on the right path. It was a start. In the following days, Anna began to leave the house to walk through the park, the same place where she had found the elderly man. She secretly hoped to meet him again. There were so many questions I wanted to ask, so many things I needed to understand. However, every time I went back to the park, he wasn't there. Even so, his presence still accompanied her in some way, as if the meeting had been planned to plant the seed of hope she so needed. Anna began to pray again. His prayers were short, insecure, and often confusing. She no longer knew how to talk to God after so long, and the words seemed to stumble on her lips. But even so, she continued. Each night, before going to sleep, she closed her eyes and tried, with an open heart, to find something within herself that could rekindle her faith. God, if you are still there, show me the way, she said, almost like a whisper. There were no immediate answers, but the feeling of emptiness was slowly beginning to dissipate. Over time, Anna realized that her perspective on life was changing, albeit in a subtle way. The deep despair that previously dominated his days began to give way to small moments of calm and reflection. The tragedies he faced, although still painful, no longer seemed so overwhelming. Anna began to understand that, perhaps, God had not abandoned her as she thought. Perhaps, he was waiting for her to open the doors of her heart again, allowing him to enter to heal her wounds. As she continued her journey to rediscover her faith, Anna knew she still had a long way to go. But, for the first time in a long time, she felt that this path was possible to follow. The darkness in which it had been immersed for so long began to give way, giving way to a soft and constant light. The small seed of faith planted in Anna's heart began to grow. The process was slow and, on many days, imperceptible, but something inside her was changing. She no longer saw herself as a completely lost woman, abandoned by God and life. The pain I felt was still there, but it seemed more bearable. It was as if, little by little, she was learning to carry the weight of her wounds more lightly. The emptiness, which previously seemed impossible to fill, began to be replaced by a feeling of renewal, still fragile, but real. Anna continued her daily walks through the park, the same place where she had met the elderly man who had planted that seed of hope in her heart. She hadn't met him yet, but every time she passed the bench where they sat, a feeling of peace invaded her. It was as if that meeting had been a milestone in his life, the moment in which the storm began to dissipate. As she walked, Anna reflected on her prayers, which, although hesitant at first, now began to have more fluidity. She still didn't know if God was listening, but somehow she felt he was closer. One afternoon, while Anna was sitting on a bench near the park chapel, watching people pass by, a young woman, with a baby in her arms, approached her. The woman had a tired look on her face, as if she had been fighting something for a long time. Without knowing why, Anna found herself smiling at the stranger. A simple smile, but full of empathy. The woman approached hesitantly and asked, "May I sit with you for a moment?" Anna nodded, and the two remained silent for a few minutes, until the young woman began to talk about her own life. She talked about the challenges of being a single mother, about losing a job and the fear of not being able to take care of her child alone. "You know, I used to believe in God," said the young woman with a heavy sigh. "But lately, I feel like he doesn't listen to me anymore. I pray and ask for help, but everything seems to get worse." The woman's words were eerily familiar to Anna. She saw herself reflected in that young woman, as if she were looking at a younger version of herself. Carefully, Anna chose her words. "I understand how you feel," he began, his voice soft. "There was a time when I felt that way too, completely disconnected from God. I also thought he had abandoned me." The young woman looked at her curiously, and Anna continued, "But I've learned that sometimes we can't see the help he is offering us, and it may not be in our time or in the way we expect, but he is there." Anna realized that, as she spoke, something inside her solidified. It was as if, by sharing his own experience, he was reaffirming the faith that was slowly growing back in his heart. The young woman listened attentively, and for a moment a gleam of hope appeared in her eyes. "I want to believe again," said the young woman, almost in a whisper. "But it's so difficult." Anna smiled. recognizing that struggle, and answered sincerely, "It doesn't have to be all at once. Faith can start small like a seed, and over time it will grow if you allow." After some time talking, the young woman thanked her and left, leaving Anna alone on the bench again. But something had changed. For the first time, Anna realized that she was becoming a source of hope, even without having all the answers for herself. Meeting this young woman reinforced something important. Her own faith healing was happening from the inside out, and, unexpectedly, she was also beginning to help others on their journeys. Little by little, Anna began to understand that faith was not a straight line, but a process full of ups and downs. She knew there were still difficult days ahead, days when doubt could return. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face these days with courage. The healing journey was just beginning, but now she knew she was no longer alone. In the weeks that followed, Anna continued to cultivate her faith, realizing that every day, something inside her grew, even if imperceptibly. She no longer saw herself as lost as before, and although life's difficulties were still present, there was a new willingness to face them. The mourning for the loss of her mother was still strong, as was the uncertainty about her professional future. But now Anna knew that she didn't need to carry everything alone. There was an invisible thread that sustained her, the presence of God, who, even in silence, seemed to guide her back to the right path. One day, while walking through the park again, Anna felt an unexpected urge to enter the chapel that was next to the lake. It was a small, simple space, almost always empty. But that afternoon, something compelled her to walk through its doors. Upon entering, she was greeted by the welcoming silence that always characterized that place. The soft late afternoon light streamed through the colorful stained glass windows, casting shadows and vibrant tones across the stone floor. Anna walked slowly to the altar and sat on one of the benches. There, in silence, he allowed himself to relax completely. She wasn't sure what she expected to find at that moment, but little by little she realized that something in her heart was opening. He closed his eyes and, without thinking about perfect words or how to pray correctly, he just let his thoughts flow. "God, I don't know if I'm doing this right," she began, feeling a certain vulnerability. "But I'm here, and I want to believe that the Lord is here too." The silence that followed her words didn't bother her. In that moment, the simple fact that he was addressing God again in such an honest way was enough. Minutes passed, and Anna continued to sit there, in silence, observing the environment around her. It was then that, when she opened her eyes, she saw someone familiar sitting on one of the benches in the background. The elderly man, who had planted the seed of faith months before, was there, serene, as if he had been waiting for her. Anna was surprised and, at the same time, felt a deep calm. She hadn't thought that she would meet him again, but somehow, she knew that this moment had a special meaning. She got up and walked towards him, who was watching her with the same welcoming look as before. "I knew you would come back," said the elderly man with a soft smile. Anna, moved, sat next to him, not knowing how to start. "I don't have all the answers yet," she confessed, her voice low, almost like a whisper. "But I feel like something is changing in me." The man nodded slowly, his gaze steady and encouraging. "Faith isn't something that happens all at once. It's like you said to that young girl in the park. It's a seed, and now that seed is growing." Anna was silent for a moment, absorbing those words. The elderly man, who seemed so wise and compassionate, continued, "You have found God again, Anna. But the most important thing is that He has never left you. All this time, He has been by your side, waiting for you to look within and realize that." Those words touched something deep in his heart. It was as if all the weight of despair and loneliness he carried was finally beginning to lift. God had not abandoned her. It was she who, for so long, was unable to see His presence. The elderly man stood up and, before saying goodbye, placed his hand on Anna's shoulder once again, as he had done the first time they met. "Keep walking, my daughter. The journey of faith never ends, but it becomes lighter when you know you are not alone." With that, he left the chapel, leaving Anna once again immersed in a welcoming silence. This time, however, she didn't feel lost or disoriented. On the contrary, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years, as if the storm in his soul was finally calming. Anna remained there for a few more minutes, reflecting on everything that had happened in the last few months. I knew I would still face challenges, and that life would continue to present difficulties. But now there was something different. She had found her faith again, and that was all she needed to move forward, one day at a time, knowing that no matter what came, God would be with her, supporting her every step of the way. After that day in the chapel, Anna began to live differently. It wasn't a drastic or spectacular change, but the presence of God, which had previously seemed distant and unreachable, was now present in every little part of his life. She realized that faith, just as the elderly man had told her, did not need to be immediate or total. It could be something that grew slowly, like a plant that sprouts in fertile soil after a long drought. And Anna was willing to nurture this faith, even if the process was full of ups and downs. At the hospital where she worked, Anna began to deal with her patients with a new perspective. As a nurse, she had always had a practical and efficient approach, but now there was an added layer of empathy in the way she worked. Before, I saw situations as problems to be solved, medical challenges that needed a solution. Now, she saw the people behind the diagnoses. During their daily interactions, Anna began offering more than medical care. He also offered emotional comfort, listening carefully to the stories of pain and struggle that many of his patients shared. On a busy afternoon, Anna was called to assist an elderly woman who had been hospitalized with a serious lung infection. The patient's condition was delicate, and Anna knew that the prognosis was not favorable. However, while talking to the elderly woman, he realized that there was something deeper going on there. The woman, although physically fragile, radiated a serenity that impressed Anna. "I don't know what the future holds for me," said the elderly woman, her voice soft but firm. "But I know that God is with me, and that gives peace." Those words echoed inside Anna, reminding her of her own process of reuniting with faith. She sat next to the woman's bed and held her hand for a moment, saying nothing. He just listened, respecting that patient's spiritual strength. The trust that the elderly woman had in God, even in the face of the fragility of life, was inspiring. And, in a way, Anna realized that meeting that woman was a continuation of her own journey. Faith was not something that was limited to moments of victory or success. He was often strongest in moments of weakness and uncertainty. At home, Anna also felt the effects of this new phase in her life. She began to set aside moments of the day to pray, no longer hurriedly or desperately, but calmly. Their prayers, which previously seemed like cries for help in the midst of chaos, were now sincere conversations with God. "Sometimes I didn't know what to say, but I felt that the simple intention of being in contact with him was enough." There was a peace in her routine that, months ago, would have been unthinkable. Over time, Anna realized that although life's problems had not disappeared, her grief for her mother was still real, and uncertainties about her career still challenged her. Her way of dealing with these issues had changed. Faith helped her face each challenge with less fear and more confidence that, in some way, God was guiding her steps. This certainty, although subtle, made all the difference. The weight of carrying everything alone had lifted. One day, while taking a walk in the park, Anna returned to the bench where she had met the elderly man for the first time. She sat down as if hoping, perhaps, to meet him again. But as he looked around, he realized there was no need to relive that moment. He had already fulfilled the purpose of planting the seed of faith in his heart. Now, it was up to her to continue to nurture that faith, carrying it with her in every aspect of her life. Anna closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, feeling the light breeze on her face. In her mind, a silent prayer formed. "Thank you, God, for never leaving me." She knew that her spiritual journey would continue, and that there would be moments of doubt and challenges along the way. But now, Anna had something she didn't have before. Confidence in God and in herself to move forward, one step at a time. Anna's reunion with her faith brought changes not only in her outlook on life, but also in how she perceived herself. In the days that followed, she began to reflect deeply on the transformation that was happening within herself. There was a new sense of purpose, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Before, her life seemed like a sequence of empty days, where losses and disappointments left her disoriented. Now, faith in God was slowly filling the gaps that were once occupied by pain and resentment. On her lonely nights, Anna began to revisit the past, not with the weight of sadness, but with a more compassionate perspective. His mother's death, which had been the catalyst for his spiritual crisis, was now remembered with more tenderness and less bitterness. She still missed her, but now she understood that grief was part of the healing process. Accepting this loss and allowing herself to feel sadness, without drowning in it, was one of the biggest steps she took on her journey. She came to believe that her mother was at peace, and that brought comfort to her own journey. At work, Anna continued to notice how her approach to patients changed. Once, while talking to a man being treated for aggressive cancer, he opened up about his fear of death. "I don't know if I believe in anything after this," he confessed. "I don't know if there's a purpose to what I'm going through." Anna, who may have previously responded in a practical or technical way, was surprised by her own reaction. "Sometimes we don't need to have all the answers," she said softly. "But believing that there is something beyond what we can see gives us strength to face what we don't understand." That conversation resonated deeply with Anna. She found herself reflecting on her own spiritual struggles and how the simple act of believing, even without absolute certainty, had made all the difference in her life. The man thanked her, and Anna realized that, although she was still in her own healing process, she was already able to convey hope to others. The faith she thought she had lost was now transforming not only her life, but also the lives of those around her. At home, Anna began to create new rituals that connected her more with her spirituality. She read short passages from the Bible every night before going to sleep, not in a rush to look for answers, but with the intention of reflecting and learning. The words, which had previously seemed distant and irrelevant, now began to make sense on a deeper level. There was a wisdom in the scriptures that she had previously been unable to see, and slowly, Anna began to find in them a guide for her life. In her prayers, she no longer asked for immediate miracles or quick solutions, but for patience, strength, and faith to face each day. Anna's relationships with her friends and family were also impacted by this internal transformation. She, who previously isolated herself, now found herself more open to sharing her feelings and thoughts. One day, a close friend visited her and commented on the change she noticed. "You feel lighter, Anna," she said. "A few months ago, I was worried about you, but now I feel like you're finding your way." Anna smiled, recognizing that, in fact, something had changed. "I think I am," she replied sincerely. "I'm still in the process, but now I know I don't have to do this alone." The recognition of this internal transformation brought a serenity that Anna had not felt in a long time. The expectations that once weighed on your shoulders, to be strong all the time or to understand everything about life, began to disappear. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to accept that not everything was in her control and that this was part of the human experience. There was a quiet strength in accepting her limitations, a strength that came from the faith she was rebuilding. Anna knew that the journey was not linear. There would be days of doubts and setbacks, but the difference now was that she no longer felt alone. God, who previously seemed distant, was by his side at every step, and this gave him the courage to continue walking, with the certainty that, even in the darkest moments, the light of faith could always be rediscovered. As time passed, Anna realized that her newfound faith would also be put to the test. If before she felt that her life was beginning to balance, now new challenges were emerging. The faith she had been cultivating, like a delicate plant, began to be tested by the difficulties of everyday life, especially at work. At the hospital, the volume of patients increased drastically, and Anna found herself overwhelmed, dealing with increasingly complex and painful cases. The environment, which previously brought him a certain comfort, now became a burden. A particularly difficult situation occurred when Anna was tasked with caring for a seriously ill child. The girl, just 7 years old, had suffered a rare complication after surgery and was fighting for her life. The desperate parents were looking for answers, but the medical team had already done everything they could. Every day, Anna followed the child's decline, trying to provide the best support possible to the family, but she felt powerless in the face of the fragility of that life. It was at that moment that doubts began to reappear, in a subtle but insistent way. Why would God allow such a small child to suffer like this? This question echoed in Anna's mind every night as she tried to sleep. The trust he had been rebuilding seemed shaken by the cruelty of what he was witnessing. As much as she tried to hold on to the idea that God had a greater plan, the reality of human pain and suffering made this difficult to accept. Her prayers, which previously flowed more easily, were now said apathetically, as if she no longer knew how to connect with God in the face of so much suffering. One morning, upon entering the pediatric ICU, Anna met the girl's parents. Her mother, her eyes red from crying, hugged her, begging for a miracle. Anna, not knowing what to say, just offered her shoulder, trying to hide the despair she also felt. She wanted to believe that there was still a chance, that God would intervene somehow, but deep down she fought a sense of disbelief. How could he keep his faith firm in the midst of so much suffering? That situation made her question everything again, and Anna feared that she was going back to where she had started. After a long shift, Anna went to the hospital chapel. She sat down on one of the benches, emotionally exhausted, and looked at the altar in silence. "God, please help me understand," she whispered, almost helplessly. "I'm trying to have faith, but it seems so hard right now. Why does such an innocent child have to suffer like this?" The silence that followed was profound, but different from the empty silence she usually felt. There was a sense of waiting, as if an answer was being constructed, even if she couldn't hear it right away. At that moment, Anna realized that her spiritual journey would not only be made up of moments of peace and reconnection. There would be periods when her faith would be brutally challenged, times when she would feel lost and without answers. However, this did not mean that God had abandoned her. On the contrary, perhaps it was in these trials that his faith would be most needed. Even when doubts dominated her, she knew that there was a greater force that sustained her, and that, no matter how painful it was, God would not let her face it alone. In the days that followed, Anna began to change her perspective on the suffering she saw around her. It was not a passive or resigned acceptance, but an understanding that pain was part of the human journey and that, in some way, faith in God helped her carry that burden. She didn't have all the answers and probably never would, but she began to see that faith was not about eliminating suffering, but about finding the strength to endure it, with the certainty that, even in the shadows, there was light. Little by little, Anna realized that her faith, although shaken, was growing in a different way, deeper, more resilient. And with this new understanding, she began to face her daily challenges with a more open heart, knowing that even when times were tough, God would still be with her, supporting her every step of the way. Anna, after that difficult morning in the hospital chapel, felt that an essential part of her faith journey was unfolding. There was a greater lesson to be learned, accepting the inexplicable. She had always tried to understand the logic behind suffering and pain, seeking clear answers to the injustices she saw in the world. However, he was now beginning to realize that, on his spiritual journey, not all questions had an immediate or understandable answer. True faith did not consist in having all the explanations, but in trusting, even when everything seemed dark and confusing. In the weeks that followed, the girl's situation in the ICU worsened. Her parents were devastated, and Anna did her best to comfort them, but she felt helpless in the face of the gravity of the situation. One day, while talking to her mother, the woman said something that touched her deeply. "I don't understand why this is happening to my daughter," said the mother, with tears in her eyes. "But I know that, in some way, God is with us. I feel it. I don't know what will happen, but I trust He is in control." Those words, spoken in the midst of so much suffering, awakened something in Anna. Even in the midst of the deepest pain, the girl's mother still managed to maintain her faith. She did not demand answers. She did not ask for divine explanations. "I just trusted." And it was at that moment that Anna began to understand the true power of faith, accepting that God's purpose is often beyond our human understanding, but that His presence is constant, even when we cannot see it clearly. With this new understanding, Anna began to approach her work and personal life differently. Instead of worrying about finding justifications for everything, she began to accept the fact that some things were beyond her control. This didn't mean she gave up fighting for what was right or caring wholeheartedly for her patients. On the contrary, this new posture gave her a serenity that she didn't have before. Anna began to see each day as an opportunity to practice trust, not only in God, but also in the natural process of life with all its uncertainties. One afternoon, while reviewing her patients' charts, Anna found herself remembering her own journey, the moments of darkness, the doubts, the internal battles she had fought over the past few months. And as difficult as everything had been, she now saw how much she had grown. The faith that was being reborn within her was stronger and more mature. It was not a faith based on immediate miracles or easy answers, but a faith built on acceptance and trust that God was always present, even in moments of greatest suffering. The girl's situation in the ICU eventually reached its conclusion, and, despite medical efforts, she did not survive. The hospital was enveloped in sadness, and Anna, along with the team, had to deal with the loss of such a young life. It was a painful moment, but when talking to the girl's mother after the event, Anna realized the strength of that family's faith. "My daughter is at peace now," said the mother, holding Anna's hand gratefully. "And I know she is with God. I don't understand everything that happened, but I accept it because I trust Him." Upon hearing these words, Anna felt an inexplicable peace. She knew that even in the midst of sadness, there was a greater presence, something that transcended suffering. Faith, at its essence, was this unshakable trust, this ability to accept the divine mystery, even when everything around seemed to fall apart. The girl's mother had found solace in her faith, and Anna realized that she was also learning to do the same. Over the next few days, Anna reflected deeply on what she had learned. Accepting the inexplicable was one of the greatest tests of faith she had faced. Even when the answers didn't come, or when the suffering seemed to have no end, trusting in God was what kept her standing. It was a confidence that went beyond what she could see or understand. It was a mature faith, rooted in the certainty that, no matter how difficult the path, God was present, guiding and sustaining. After the loss of the girl, Anna entered a new phase of her spiritual journey. Accepting the inexplicable had been a crucial step, but now she faced an even greater challenge, developing a resilient faith capable of withstanding moments of crisis. Although the sadness of loss was still present, Anna felt that something deep had changed in her heart. The faith she had worked so hard to regain was now stronger and more grounded. It was no longer the fragile and wavering faith that faded in the face of difficulties, but a faith that had been tested and, despite this, remained firm. At the hospital, the days continued to be intense, but Anna began to notice a difference in the way she dealt with the challenges. The pressure and tiredness were still there, but she no longer let them consume her. His trust in God, although discreet, was present in every decision he made. When she encountered situations that seemed beyond her control, instead of despairing, Anna now remembered that faith was her anchor. And, even without understanding why things happened, she knew that her strength came from something greater, which silently supported her. One morning, while caring for an elderly patient who was in his final days, Anna saw how the serenity of faith could bring peace even in the most difficult times. The man, who knew his life was coming to an end, spoke to her about his own spiritual journey. "Doctor," he said, his voice weak but calm, "I've lived many years, and the only thing that kept me going was my faith. I don't know what comes next, but I know that God was with me every step of the way. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a life guided by Him." These words resonated with Anna, as if they were a reflection of what she herself had been learning. Faith, more than a certainty that everything would be perfect, was the strength that allowed us to move forward, even when the path was uncertain. At that moment, Anna realized that, like that man, she was also building a life supported by this deep trust in God. It was not a faith that promised to avoid suffering, but a faith that gave him the resilience to go through it. At home, Anna started to reserve more time for moments of prayer and reflection. These moments were a refuge for her, a break from the fast pace of her life. She knew her faith journey would continue to be challenged, but now she felt more prepared to face the ups and downs. In one of her prayers, Anna thanked God for everything she had learned. "Lord, thank you for never leaving me, even when I thought I was alone," she prayed, her heart full of gratitude. "I know there is still a lot to learn, but now I know I can trust you, even on the hardest days." This new phase of her life also brought a change in the way Anna saw the future. Before, uncertainties paralyzed her, and the fear of the unknown made her question her own steps. Now, however, she looked to what was to come with hope and serenity. He knew he didn't control everything, but he trusted that God was guiding his steps. The future, with all its possibilities, no longer seemed like a threat, but an opportunity to continue growing and learning. Anna also reconnected with her religious community, attending church more regularly and engaging in activities that brought her closer to others who were also on their own spiritual journey. She found that sharing her story and hearing the stories of others strengthened her faith and gave her even more certainty that life was a shared path, where everyone faced battles, but no one needed to walk alone. Over time, Anna understood that her faith, like her life, would always be a continuous construction. There would be moments of doubt, suffering, and loss, but there would also be moments of hope, joy, and renewal. What mattered, in the end, was to remain firm, trusting that, in each step, God was by her side, guiding her with love and wisdom.